Assalamu alaikum viewers. Today the topic I'm going to elaborate is the British arrival and expansion in the subcontinent. But before that, if you have not subscribed my channel, please do it and like and share the videos as well. First of all, we have to see what was EIC. EIC means East India Company, and in 1600 Queen Elizabeth I granted merchants permission to form the East India Company. The EIC was given a monopoly on trade between Britain and other parts of East Africa. They landed in Surat in 1608 but started trading in 1612, and they were their influence in India grew gradually. Initially, the East India had few bases on the Indian coast, but by 1664 they established their headquarters in Bombay, and in 1690 they set up a trading post in Calcutta. The EIC traded spices, silks and cotton with Indians, leading to the profitable trade. The company formed a large private army to safeguard trading posts due to profitability. By the early 18th century, the EIC had three main bases, Bombay, Calcutta and Madras, which they called presidencies. And the East India Company expanded its power throughout the 18th century, and in this chapter we are going to see that how they expanded it. First of all, we have to see the reasons of involvement of EIC in the subcontinent, why they wanted to come over here. So as you know that they established their headquarters over here, but there were some reasons. Number one was cheap raw material. Cheap raw material means that the British wanted more raw material because of the Industrial Revolution, and they wanted to gain advantage of cheap raw material which was available in the subcontinent. Then the second point is the spice trade. And in the subcontinent, it was famous for its spices, cotton and other raw materials. And on the other hand, the British were experiencing the Industrial Revolution, so EIC wanted to gain advantage from the trade. Trade in spices from southern India, cotton goods and yarn from Gujarat, sugar from Madras, and silk and potassium from Bengal was very profitable. Cotton was a vital trading item for the British textile, and due to Industrial Revolution they wanted more and more cotton. They took these resources to England and converted them into finished goods and exported them to earn the foreign exchange. Then the next point is the monopoly in trade. The EIC feared that the French and Portuguese would initiate trade in India and would have monopoly over trade in the subcontinent. The Dutch had already achieved monopoly over trade in the East Indies. So as an alternative, EIC turned to India. Local traders increased the prices of the resources after watching the increased demand of raw material. This became one reason of the European powers to wage wars against each other to get monopoly. Eventually, British defeated them and created its own monopoly over there. Then, the spread of religion and culture. Culture is missing over here. Another reason for their arrival in the subcontinent was to spread their religion, Christianity. They denied the fact that they came here to do so, but in reality, they forcefully converted the locals into Christians. Christian missionaries were called for this purpose. Churches were established all over the India. British thought that they have more superior culture than and Indians are uncivilized. They considered it as their prime duty to spread their culture over there in the subcontinent. Then the next point is the access to warm water. British wanted to extend their trade towards the East and Southeast Asia. They needed strategic ports to extend their trade. Indian Peninsula was the place which was surrounded by warm water, and they can use the multiple ports of that place which can operate throughout the year. Such ports could help them to trade in multiple directions. Now, if we talk about the wealth, which is the last point, that despite the highly profitable trade and very cheap raw materials, India had a lot of wealth. Bengal was the richest province and EIC exploited to its fullest, creating famine. EIC officials became habitual of receiving gifts which increased their wealth, their personal wealth of course. 1,000 million pounds were taken from the Bank of Ganges and deposited them on the Bank of Thames in 150 years, which was a huge amount then. Now, if we talk about the British government, what they did, how they intervened. From 1770 onwards, British government restricted EIC for trading purposes only. After reports of misgovernance and corruption in Bengal, Supreme Court was set up in Calcutta. Police force and civil services were also introduced. And by 19th century, powers of EIC were further limited, and by 1858, it was completely abolished. Now there is another question which is very important and which mostly comes in different examinations, that how the British westernized Indians. How did they do that? So the British power, coupled with a Christian sense of duty, ensured the imposition of changes affecting everyone, leading to anxiety and opposition. Westernization sparked resentment, particularly when introduced by distant authorities. First of all, they targeted the official language. And in 1835, English replaced Persian as the official language, fostering westernization by exposing Indians to English literature and ideas through government-established schools. The educational system was made to instill European values in educated Indians, aiming to facilitate British governance. However, the imposition of European culture may not have been suitable for the Indian society. Despite this, the use of English as a common language began to unify India as an important outcome of these changes. Next one was Thuggy. In central and upper India, armed robbers known as thugs claimed to serve a goddess, using ritualistic murder to terrorize people. So the East India Company, led by Colonel Mann in 1830, undertook a forceful campaign to eradicate thuggies, capturing and dealing with around 2,000 thugs, and a move widely supported by the local people as well. Now, means of communication was another change. The first public train journey in India occurred in 1853, viewed by British as a mean to extend their power and ideas across the subcontinent, aiding industry by facilitating transportation of raw materials and goods. Railways also helped maintain law and order, enabling swift troops movements and providing convenient travel for civil servants and businessmen. Benefits for Indians included rapid transportation of food during famine, easier family visits, and pilgrimage opportunities. Now, if we talk about the act of female infanticide, in 1795, female infanticide was outlawed as murder, through enforcement proved challenging for years. Female infanticide means that the killing of small female babies. When they were born, they were buried alive. Sati was another Hindu practice of widow burning. Initially met British reluctance, but was eventually banned in 1829, largely due to the pressure from the Christian missionaries and Indian activist Ram Mohan Roy. And Lord Bentinck, as Governor General, played a significant role in implementing these reforms. Then there were social reforms as well, that the introduction of remarriage for Hindu widows, social reforms such as amendment of hijab for Muslim women were met with resistance. Spread of Christianity. In 1833, the East India Company allowed the Christian missionaries in India, spreading Western knowledge and values through their intolerance towards Indians led to resentment. Christianity gained prominence, giving rise to the Anglo-Indian community. Indian soldiers faced resentment over serving in the British Army. And last but not the least were the economic reforms. British economic policies imposed heavy taxes, leading to corruption among tax collectors and hardship for peasants and small landowners. Indian soldiers received lower salaries compared to their British counterparts, while British goods flooded Indian markets, undermining local products. Despite a population disparity, cooperation with British offered benefits, including access to global trade networks and the establishment of infrastructure and educational institutions. India's divisions, including religious, linguistic, cultural, and economic, contributed to its complex social landscape. So these were the major reasons, and it's a very important question. Then, now moving towards the British expansion in the subcontinent. First of all, we have to see what was the Indian resistance against the British. There were some successes and there were many failures. So let's talk about the successes first. Number one success was because of the Tipu Sultan. Then British had the defeat in Afghanistan, and then the work of Titu. We will see that in detail. First of all, let's start with Tipu Sultan. He was a ruler of Mysore, posed a significant challenge to British in India. The British were uneasy about Tipu's defiance and suspected French supported him because he had the modern weapons like British. Tipu was committed to resisting British expansion and aimed to match their military might. He reportedly possessed formidable weapons including 50 cannons, 100,000 cannonballs, 10 muskets, as well as rockets and handguns, which were given to him by the French people. Despite British efforts, Tipu's army emerged victorious in several battles against the British. Now, defeat in Afghanistan was the concern over Russian expansion of Britain. It was a British concern that the Russian would expand in Central Asia and it would trouble the British governments in the early 19th century. Efforts were made to secure Afghanistan due to fears of Russian influence. Ranjit Singh, ruling the Punjab under Sikh authority, was deemed too powerful to confront militarily. In 1838, a treaty was signed leaving Ranjit Singh in control of north of river Satluj. Both British and Ranjit Singh agreed on the necessity of an independent Afghanistan, and the British hoped Sikhs would assist in establishing a friendly ruler in Kabul, but Ranjit Singh declined direct involvement. Consequently, the British attempted to influence the region through Afghanistan in 1839. However, an Afghan rebellion in 1841 resulted in a massacre or capture of the entire British contingent, sparing only one survivor to tell the events only. So it was a major defeat for the British. Then Titumir's work, which was also explained in an earlier one video, that Titu Mir, also known as Sayyid Mir Nisar, was a prominent Bengali freedom fighter, and he rallied against the oppression of landlords who were called Zimedars and the British colonial rule in Bengal. Titu Mir aimed to liberate Bengal from both British dominance and perceived un-Islamic practices. Proclaiming himself the king, he made a force of 15,000 supporters, and in October 1831 he constructed a bamboo fort at Narkalberia and successfully repelled British attempts to dismantle it. But later on he was he died in a fight. Then now we will see what were the British victories over Indians, what were the failures of Indians. So there are different battles which we are going to read in that. And initially focused on trade, the EIC company shifted towards the territorial control in 18th century, and they fought many battles like Battle of Plassey, Buxar, Battle of Mysore, also called Anglo-Mysore Wars, Anglo-Maratha Wars, Anglo-Sikh Wars, or annexation of Punjab and NWFP. Then there was an annexation of Sindh, and then Doctrine of Lapse. So we are going to see all of these in detail. First of all, let's start with Battle of Plassey. It occurred at Plassey near the north of Calcutta, and it fought between Sirajud-Dowlah and Nawab of Bengal and the British East India Company. Sirajud-Dowlah, newly appointed Nawab, ordered the British to halt fortification expansion, and French influence encouraged Sirajud-Dowlah to attack the British base in Calcutta, where he briefly captured in 1756, but British sent reinforcements led by Robert Clive, who bribed key figures in Sirajud-Dowlah's camp, and his larger army, Sirajud-Dowlah's larger army, about 50,000 soldiers, 40 cannons and 10 war elephants, were defeated by a smaller British force under Robert Clive of almost 3,000 soldiers. Sirajud-Dowlah was killed in the battle and his body found in a river afterwards. British East India Company gained control over Bengal Strait. It was the result, and Robert Clive was appointed as Governor General of Bengal, and battle consolidated the British East India Company influence in Bengal, and it was marked the beginning of the company's expansion across India over the following century. So it was the first expansion fight. Then comes the Battle of Buxar, and battle occurred in 1764 at Buxar, a Bengal town on Ganges River, fought between the British East India Company led by Hector Munro and a combined army including Mir Qasim, the Nawab of Bengal, Shujaud-Dowlah, the Nawab of Oudh, and the Mughal King Shah Alam II. It was a decisive victory for the British East India Company. Company's authority in the subcontinent solidified, boosting its prestige. Victory further strengthened the company's control, particularly in Bihar. Shah Alam II, who was a key figure, signed the Treaty of Allahabad, granting the company Diwani rights. What are Diwani rights? They will be explained later. Diwani rights, let me tell you something about that. Diwani rights allowed the company to manage revenues of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa effectively, making it the dominant ruler of the region. So, Battle of Mysore or Anglo-Mysore Wars are basically the series of wars spanning 3 decades in the late 18th century between the Kingdom of Mysore and the British East India Company. Hyder Ali and later his successor Tipu Sultan led Mysore against British attacks from the west, south and east alongside the Marathas and Nizam forces from the north. Tipu Sultan allied with French during the Third Anglo-Mysore War, and Anglo-Mysore Wars, the Hyder Ali made gains against the British, nearly capturing Madras. In Second Anglo-Mysore War, more intense battles occurred with outcomes shifting unpredictably. Tipu Sultan defeated British forces, leading to the 1784 Treaty of Mangalore, notable for being the last British-Indian treaty with an Indian ruler on equal terms. Tipu Sultan's invasion of the British ally state Travancore during the Third Anglo-Mysore War ended in the decisive victory for the British. War concluded with the 1792 the Treaty of Sengaparatham, with Tipu surrendering half of his kingdom to the British and allies. Tipu Sultan was killed in the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War as Mysore faced attacks from British, Marathas and Nizam forces combinedly, and British secured a decisive victory at the siege of Sengaparatham, leading to the dissolution of Mysore. These wars significantly weakened Mysore and consolidated British control over much of India, making it a pivotal moment in the colonial history. Now, turning towards the Anglo-Maratha War, series of the 3 wars fought in the Indian subcontinent between the Maratha Empire and the British East India Company. The first Anglo-Maratha War was conflict between East India Company and the Maratha Empire. The war initiated with the Treaty of Surat and concluded with the Treaty of Salbai. The Second Anglo-Maratha War marked the second confrontation between the British East India Company and the Maratha Empire, resulting in further clashes between the two powers. The Third Anglo-Maratha War represented the conclusive and decisive conflict between the British East India Company and the Maratha Empire. Peshwa Bajirao II forces rebelled against the EIC, but British victories were swift. War led to the breakup of the Maratha Empire, loss of Maratha independence. British East India Company emerged as a dominant force in India, consolidating control over most of the subcontinent, signaled at the end of the Maratha influence and autonomy in Indian affairs. Now, if we talk about the Anglo-Sikh Wars or annexation of Punjab and NWFP, Maharaja Ranjit Singh established the Sikh Empire in the early 19th century, known as the Sixth Kingdom of Punjab. Ranjit Singh maintained a policy of early friendship with the British, signed a treaty of perpetual friendship in 1809. He also bolstered his military forces to deter British aggression and to wage war against Afghans. After Ranjit Singh's death in 1839, conflict erupted among the rival chiefs over succession. So fearful of British invasion, the Sikhs believed attacking was the best defense and engaged in conflict of south of Satluj River. In the First Anglo-Sikh War, the Sikhs suffered defeat at the Battle of Aliwal in 1846, leading to the signing of the Treaty of Lahore. In the Second Anglo-Sikh War, the Sikhs suffered another defeat, ultimately resulting in the downfall of the Sikh Empire in India. British annexed Punjab and Northwest Frontier Province. The Sikh Empire's downfall marked the annexation of Punjab by British East India Company in 1849, consolidating British control over the region. Now, this sixth one is the annexation of Sindh. By the early 19th century, British feared Russian expansion and aimed to prevent Afghanistan from falling into Russian hands. A rebellion in Afghanistan in 1841 led to the death of all British troops in the country, resulting in a blow to British pride. To restore their prestige and deter further challenges, British turned to Sindh, ruled by the Amirs of Sindh. Despite a treaty of friendship, Britain sought to annex Sindh to regain their prestige and prevent Sikh expansion. Britain fabricated and exaggerated a situation to create an excuse for war. British journal provoked the emirs of Sindh into attacking the British residency to justify the war. Despite no legitimate reason for war, disregarding their treaty, Britain crushed Sindh forces and ordered a massacre to assert dominance. What were the motivations? Economically and financially, Sindh held little value to Britain. British seized Sindh to control trade routes near Afghanistan, to send a message of power to the superiority of the Afghans, and the annexation of Sindh by Britain is labeled as shameful act due to the unjustified war, betrayal of the treaty, and massacre ordered to assert dominance. Now, the last but not least is the Doctrine of Lapse. British Governor General Lord Dalhousie introduced the Doctrine of Lapse in 1852. It was an annexation policy aimed at extending British control in India. According to the doctrine, any princely state or territory directly under British influence would be annexed if the ruler died without a natural heir. The ruler was mainly manifestly incompetent. Several princely states, including Jhansi, Satara, Nagpur, Jaipur, and Udaipur, were annexed by the British under this policy. However, doctrine of lapse was widely unpopular and caused significant resentment among Indian rulers and subjects. The policy contributed to disconnect among Indian rulers and people. It is generally believed to have played a role in the outbreak of the Indian Mutiny in 1857 and the widespread revolt that followed. So this was the chapter of Indian arrival of the British and the expansion of the British. I know it's little bit more theoretical, but it was very important to teach you in just a manner that every war would be understandable by you. You should know the era in that the war happened, the year, and the people who were involved in that, the main events of the war, and the outcome of the war. So these four things about every war you should know if you want to attempt this question as a 14-mark question, or even in 7 marks, you should know about the main events of the different wars. Thank you so much.